Please take your seats. Good afternoon. I'm Doug Richardson, and on behalf of the American Association of Geographers, I'd like to welcome you all to today's keynote. As you all know, the AAG annual meeting is attended by geographers and other professionals from a wide range of backgrounds. Our field unites some of the best minds to tackle today's toughest issues, always through a spatial lens. In regard to our country's challenges, including divided politics and fair representation, thinking spatially can have a huge impact, and I think our keynote speaker would agree. Eric Holder's career of public service began long before his appointment as the 82nd Attorney General of the United States. After graduating with his JD from Columbia Law School, he started as a trial lawyer in the Public Integrity section of the U.S. Department of Justice's Criminal Division. He went on to serve as Associate Judge for the Superior Court of the District of Columbia and later as U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. Under the administration of President Bill Clinton, he served as Deputy Attorney General. And after a stint in private practice at Covington and Burling law firm, he returned to the public sector as President Barack Obama's Attorney General of the United States, where he was the third longest serving Attorney General in U.S. history. And that's something, you can see the revolving door we now have with Attorney Generals. And the first ever African-American to hold that position. His lifetime of public service has been unfaltering, dedicated to the pursuit of civil rights and equal justice. Under his leadership, the Department of Justice pursued the defense of voting rights, federal criminal justice reform, environmental protection, and national marriage equality, just to name a few highlights. He has fought tirelessly for equality under the law and fair representation for all Americans. And his current project does not stray far from these themes. Since the end of his tenure as Attorney General, he has turned his focus toward an issue of high national importance, in fact, I think crucial importance, the issue of gerrymandering and redistricting. He chairs the National Democratic Redistricting Committee, which seeks to combat unfairly gerrymandered districts leading up to the 2021, when they will be redrawn after the decennial census. Together with the support of former President Obama and a number of other national leaders, the NDRC is a coordinated effort to make maps fair and to make votes count. We'll start by hearing remarks from Attorney General Holder, and we'll end with a moderated Q&A. We're grateful and honored to have him here today with all of us as geographers. Please join me in warmly welcoming the 82nd Attorney General of the United States, Eric Holder.
Wow. There's a lot of geographers here. Hi there. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I have to tell you, I didn't expect to see this many geographers here. This is good. This is good. Thank you, Doug, for that kind introduction and for inviting me to join all of you here today. It's an honor and it's a real pleasure for me to be with you. Now, I have to be honest with you. I've been around a long time. I have spoken to a lot of groups. I was in New York yesterday speaking to Al Sharpton's National Action Network. I'm not sure I've ever expected to be addressing a room full of geographers. So this is a good thing. This is good. I love geography. No, I do. If my brother William was here, who I call Billy, we shared a room in East Elmhurst, in Queens, in New York, right near LaGuardia Airport. And if he were to describe our childhood living situation, he was always, just say it. He was always pissed off because I had in the room a huge map of the world that I thought was really important. And he always wanted to have pictures and pennants up of athletic teams and, Willie Mays and all that kind of stuff. And I love Willie Mays, but I wanted to have this map there. And so it got to the point, it wasn't the only thing that led to the dissolution of the Billy and Ricky, I used to be Ricky, living together, but it was one of the reasons why he left. And if you went to his room when he finally moved out, there were all those pictures of cars and baseball players. There was a picture of a young woman that my mother said had to come down. But I still had my maps. So I love maps. And I was not a nerd, as my brother said, for loving maps. I truly believe this. The work that you do can play, I think, a really critical role in the future of our democracy. That is not an overstatement. I think that we have an all-hands-on-deck moment for the United States of America. As citizens, we all have a role that we have to play. We have a responsibility to improve this great nation of ours. Now, I don't want to sound partisan here, but I want to share, real thoughts that I have, and I want to be frank with you. I don't think that there's any doubt that the United States is now facing a crisis of leadership. Too many routinely denigrate science and use ideology and not rational thinking as the basis for policy making. This is still, for example, a nation that I think is comfortable with facts. And the notion of alternative facts is something that, as a native New Yorker, a person from Queens, we had a different word, a different term to describe alternative facts. We call them lies. Now I understand that it would be easy for Americans to grow pessimistic or to throw our hands up in despair. But as I've traveled to over 25 states over the course of the past year, I've found that the people of this country are better. They are more caring than some of our small-minded leaders would have us believe. The civic awakening that we've experienced, I think, since January of 2017, I don't think can be a moment. It has to be a sustained movement to reclaim the country and move us in a better, more inclusive, and ultimately optimistic direction. For too many Americans in too many states, the political system is simply not working. The fact is, there has been a systematic effort to cripple our democracy and to disenfranchise those who may not subscribe to certain political views. Now, our democracy has been manipulated through racial and through partisan gerrymandering. It has been impaired by provably false claims of widespread voter fraud, and it's been undermined, I think, through shameless acts of voter and political suppression. Now, when I left government, where again, maps were a big part of my life as Attorney General when it came to deciding whether or not a particular district in a voting context was a fair one, an appropriate one under the Voting Rights Act. Before it was gutted by the Shelby County decision, we looked at maps. In the Situation Room, where we made life and death decisions, we looked at maps. When it came to fighting the Ebola epidemic and how we were going to deploy our resources, we used maps. When I left the government, I wanted to stay engaged in the life of this nation and to continue my fight for voting rights. That is why I helped to launch, and I'm really proud to chair, the National Democratic Redistricting Committee. Now, the NDRC is working to make our democracy more representative. We're working to rebuild a system where citizens choose their representatives and dismantle what I think is an unjust status quo where politicians are picking their voters. Now, gerrymandering has been around since the early 1800s, and people always tell me that, well, you're fighting gerrymandering. Gerrymandering's been with us forever. Well, just because it's been with us forever and it's bad doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to do something about it now. The problem has only grown worse in recent years. Following the census and the elections in 2010, Republican legislatures and governors expanded the practice of gerrymandering in really unprecedented ways. A report from Princeton, now I went to Columbia, so we have to take that into consideration here, and with apologies to any Princeton grads here, but a report from Princeton noted, and I quote, "Thanks to technology and political polarization, the effects of partisan gerrymandering since 2012 have been more pronounced than at any point in the last 50 years, unquote. Now, for most of our history, there were instances of incumbents protecting themselves. The prime directive of any politician is to get reelected. But for most of our history, there were instances of incumbents protecting themselves, but the intended goal of redistricting always has been to provide fair representation to citizens. Now that changed, I think, in 2011 when some Republicans had as a sole goal, and a few Democrats as well, and let's be fair about this, Republicans as well as some Democrats, with regard to the redistricting process, they tried to provide themselves the greatest possible partisan advantage. The case up now before the Supreme Court talks about what happened with Republicans in North Carolina and what Democrats tried to do in Maryland. They used new technology and software to draw precision districts in a way that was not previously possible. One legislator in North Carolina even admitted, and now this is actually true, that he drew a congressional map that locked in 10 of the 13 seats for Republicans because it was not mathematically possible to draw a map that gave his party an 11-2 partisan advantage. He said this publicly. In states like North Carolina and too many others around the country, the results of their efforts were immediate and they have been enduring. In 2012, Democrats won 1.5 million more votes than Republicans in races for the United States House of Representatives, yet Republicans gained a 234 to 201 seat advantage. A recent analysis by the Associated Press found that last fall, a blue wave, Republican gerrymandering kept Democrats from winning up to 16 more seats in the United States House of Representatives and flipping an additional 7 state legislative chambers. Now, gerrymandering not only weakens our democracy by making some voters' ballots more powerful than others, it also does, I think, damage beyond Election Day. When elections are manipulated through partisan or also through racial gerrymandering, it intensifies polarization, contributes to gridlock, and really deepens the cynicism that too many Americans feel about their governments. Now think about it. If you represent a gerrymandered district that was drawn to lock in control for your party, your biggest concern is not an opponent in a general election. Your biggest concern is a primary challenge. It's not a coincidence that the two leaders of the Freedom Caucus in the House of Representatives, and that is the most extreme part of the Republican Party, Jim Jordan and Mark Meadows, come from two of the most gerrymandered districts in the country. Now, by eliminating truly competitive elections, gerrymandering encourages politicians to ignore the will of the people. It allows them to vote for laws that put the interests of a few before the well-being of all. It allows for obstruction and for partisanship to trump patriotism. At the National Democratic Redistricting Committee, I'm committed to working in states around the country to ensure that we have a fair census in 2020, and then when we redistrict in 21, that the lines are drawn in a fair way, not a partisan way. I really want to emphasize something here. The National Democratic Redistricting Committee is not designed to gerrymander for Democrats. It is in some ways a weird thing. It's a partisan attempt at good government. So in 2021, we want to make sure that we draw lines not in a partisan way. We want to ensure that the people's wishes are reflected in the candidates who are ultimately elected. And so we're attacking this problem in every way that we can. Through the National Redistricting Foundation, which is an affiliate of the NDRC, we're filing lawsuits where the maps have been drawn illegally. And that includes lawsuits that are presently pending in Georgia, Louisiana, Virginia, and Alabama, where maps have been drawn to illegally pack minority voters into districts in violation of the Voting Rights Act. It also includes a case in North Carolina that has been filed in the state court system over the partisan gerrymandering of the state legislature. We also support reform efforts to create independent redistricting commissions to make the redistricting process far less partisan. That is to take it away from politicians altogether, put it in the hands of these nonpartisan commissions, and let them draw the lines. California does that. Arizona does that as well. I actually did an event just last week with former Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, who supports this idea of independent commissions. And he actually said that he and I were going to, that's right, terminate gerrymandering. And as we left, or towards the end of the time we were leaving, he said, Eric and I are going to say, that's right, hasta la vista to gerrymandering. So with the Terminator on my side, I'm pretty optimistic. But these independent, citizen-led redistricting commissions, I believe, are the best way to redistrict because you remove the power from politicians and you actually give it to the people. Arizona, California, 2 models for the country in this regard. They have independent, citizen-led commissions that have led to fair districts that reflect the desires and the political makeup of the people. Now, it's not possible to put these reforms for independent commissions on the ballot in every state, but they are, wherever they have been considered, overwhelmingly popular. And with our backing, ballot initiatives passed with bipartisan support last year in Colorado, in Michigan, in Missouri, in Ohio, as well as in Utah. The last prong of our strategy is building the infrastructure that we need for fair redistricting. This includes both grassroots activism and the data and technology necessary to support a fair redistricting process. Last month, we launched what is called our All on the Line campaign. It's a grassroots advocacy effort that will empower people to take part, allow people to take part in the redistricting process where it really happens, and that's in the states. Now, our activists will be engaged in get out the count efforts next year during the census and in supporting fair redistricting at the state level, which is where it happens in 2021. Now, the census in 2020 is, I think, in many ways, the foundation to all of the work that we're doing. You can't have fair representation if we don't have an accurate count. Now, I'm deeply concerned that the current administration does not take seriously what is their constitutional obligation to conduct an accurate count of all, and I'm quoting from the Constitution, an accurate count of all persons living in the United States. The Constitution says, again, persons, not citizens. The addition of a citizenship question to the census is not only wrong, it was clearly done, I believe, for political reasons to suppress the count in immigrant communities, which is why the National Redistricting Foundation is supporting a lawsuit brought by individual citizens who live in Maryland, Arizona, Florida, Texas, and Nevada. We're still waiting on a ruling from the district court in our case, but the Supreme Court will hear oral arguments on 2 separate but similar cases later this month. And both of those earlier cases were decided against the position of the administration. So one way or the other, we expect a decision on the citizenship question by the Supreme Court in June of this year. Now, I believe that this is really not a close question, and the citizenship question, I think, should be removed from the citizenship questionnaire. Now, the administration's, I believe, unconstitutional and irresponsible action would have a devastating, decade-long effect for everyone, citizens, non-citizens, and native-born as well as foreign-born. If there is a bad census, voters will be denied their constitutionally guaranteed rights to equitable political representation that is based on actual population. But the census has implications for your work, I think, as geographers. Businesses make decisions on the basis of where they should build and invest their money based on census data. The federal government distributes more than $800 billion towards education, infrastructure, healthcare, and countless other pressing needs based on the census. So this is really critical information for the health of our democracy, and we can't, like some want us to do, we can't weaponize data for partisan gain. We must use it to create fair maps and to have a fair count. Technology and mapping software have only grown more sophisticated since 2011. Left to their own devices, too many politicians will want to gerrymander themselves safe seats all over again. So you, I think, can play a role in making sure that that does not happen again, and I would encourage you all to speak up, both as individuals and as members of this great group. Although it may not always feel this way, there are still people, myself included, who believe deeply in science, and believe deeply in facts. I have a button in my office, my law firm office, it simply says, facts matter. And, you know, people look at that and think of it as a partisan thing. I'm thinking, you know, that's the most benign thing in the world, right? But it is. It's, you know, it was actually given to me at a partisan event, but I was thinking to myself, I just kind of up there, just facts matter. Think about that. That's a partisan statement. That's wrong. I can tell when a map is gerrymandered because, it usually looks kind of funny. There was one district in Pennsylvania that was called Goofy, kicking Donald Duck. And until a court threw it out, that was something that controlled the 10th district of Pennsylvania. But all of you can explain how and why a map is gerrymandered using your expertise. And that really is a critical tool, because not every district is going to look unfair to the naked eye. Not every district is going to look like Goofy kicking Donald Duck. But when you dig in to see how it was drawn, it can reveal deeply partisan intent. So your knowledge can be so important in this fight. You are prominent and you are respected voices in this very important field. For too many average Americans, even some state legislators or judges who are ruling on redistricting cases, this topic can be wonky, it can be ethereal, it can be something that is hard to understand. You have the ability to make it real so that people can understand the impact on their vote when maps are drawn for partisan advantage. You can be a voice for fairness. You can be a voice for common sense. You can help decrease the level of polarization in this country and help make our elections more competitive. Won't feel any pressure now. You can save our democracy here. Although I am, as I said, a proud Democrat, I truly believe that this should be a nonpartisan issue. Our elections should be decided by a battle of ideas between progressive values and conservative values, Republican values, Democratic values, and not who is in charge of drawing the maps or making politically motivated decisions meant to undermine the census. So by focusing on fair redistricting, we can rebuild our democracy. We can have a government that is both accountable to the people and better able to confront the issues that are facing our nation. Now, we don't have a lot of time before redistricting occurs in 2021, but I think we have a sufficient amount of time. We must use it to fundamentally change the trajectory of our politics in this country. I think the work that we do over the next couple of years will shape the next decade of this nation and even beyond that. So let's rise to the challenge of this moment. Let's join together in the pursuit of a more perfect union, one where progress is once again based on science, based on knowledge, based on facts, and where everyone's vote counts equally. Thank you all very much.
Now we are going to enter into a more of a conversational Q&A phase of the presentation. And I'm pleased to introduce Michelle Kinzer, who is the AAG's Director of Governmental Relations, and she will ask the questions. And we'll also try to collect questions from the audience with on cards as you came in. So some of those will result in questions that have been asked. So.
But we have removed all the difficult questions, just so that you understand. I'm not, right?
Yes.
The hard ones.
Okay. No data analytics.
I'm ready. Let's do this.
Thank you so much, Mr. Holder.
Sure.
We really appreciate you being here, and I know that you've spoken to a lot of different groups to try and convince folks that maps are important. But here you have a captive audience of people who very much believe that maps matter, and we're very excited to have you here. So to kick things off, we'll just start kind of broad. What are specifically some of the biggest threats that gerrymandering poses to our democracy and our system?
Well, I think at base, you end up with governments, both at the state legislative level as well as in the federal level, where you have governments or representatives who don't necessarily reflect the will of the people. And that is something that corrodes our democracy. I mean, if you look at the statistics, about 75% of the people in this country think that we should have background checks before people buy a gun. Whether you support the First Amendment or not, this is something that polls well for Democrats, Republicans, conservatives, progressives. And yet, the likelihood that Congress is going to pass such a law is pretty small, and that's because of gerrymandering and the fact that people are in these safe districts and they can vote against the will of the people who they represent and not suffer an electoral consequence. In fact, gerrymandering has the perverse things, like I said in my speech, where it drives people further and further to the right if you're on the Republican side, further and further to the left if you're on the Democratic side. And the notion of getting together and compromising, working out things, is seen as a sign of weakness, and potentially then raises the prospect of a primary challenge. In gerrymandering, you're not worried about the general election. You're only worried about a primary. So gerrymandering kind of hollows out the notion of our democracy that the people, through their representatives, have their will expressed.
And on that note, I think we saw that reflected in the 2018 midterms to a certain extent. We saw several elected officials who were either primaried out or chose not to run against a polarizing opponent. And
Right.
so I'm wondering if you think that this has given rise to a certain type of politician, a certain type of incumbent.
Yeah, I mean, I think you do see, you think back to, many of you are not old enough to remember this, but I remember that there was a day when Republicans and Democrats got together to solve problems. We used to do that. Lyndon Johnson is seen as a good president, perhaps a great president, because of, among other things, the passage of the civil rights legislation, 1964 and 65. But that would not have happened without the support of a person who I don't think gets nearly enough credit, Everett Dirksen, Senate Minority Leader, who mobilized Republicans to support legislation that Southern Democrats would not. And those kinds of people who had to worry about, general elections in the way that present politicians do not, who valued compromise in a way that present politicians do not, don't exist to the extent that they once used to, and I think our nation is the worse for it.
You alluded to this earlier. You spoke about the citizenship question, so switching gears back to that. I'm wondering if, obviously it's become polarized, it's become politicized as an immigration issue, but I have to ask on behalf of the data nerds here, it's a data integrity issue as well, which you mentioned. And so is there a way to reframe that? Do you think it's kind of past the point of no return? Can we make this more focused on the integrity of the data of the census, and what do you see as the future for the cases you've mentioned and the future of this question being included?
Yeah, I actually think that the question of whether or not the citizenship question should be on the census form is really not a hard one. There are constitutional arguments, but there's also this thing called the Administrative Procedures Act. You study that when you're in law school. And for any lawyers who are here, that's the thing that, you come out of the law school class that day with a red dot on your head because your head's hit the desk. It's really boring. And I remember those couple of days at Administrative Law, Administrative Procedures Act. I'm kind of like, whatever. I'm thinking about, whatever. Now I love the Administrative Procedures Act. And on that basis, it is clear that this administration has not done the things that it had to do, the testing, talking to experts about what the impact of the inclusion of the question was going to be on people raising their hands and being counted, a whole range of things that they should have done that they simply did not do. And so I think ultimately the court, even this very conservative Supreme Court, will, I think, rule in the way that at least 2 district court judges, and I suspect it'll be 3 by the time it gets up to the court, have said was inappropriate.
On the same note of integrity of the process, we have seen over the last few elections the issue of voter suppression being very prevalent in different states, and the citizenship question obviously being at the federal level. But I'm wondering, to what extent do issues of voter suppression and gerrymandering go hand in hand? Is there overlap? Are they found in isolated areas?
Yeah, no, there's actually a direct correlation. You see the greatest amount of voter suppression in those places where you see the greatest amount of gerrymandering. It's interesting that in those states where you see the greatest amount of gerrymandering, where you have, and to be honest, again, Republican control, Republican trifecta control, governor, both state houses, both components of the state legislature, It is there where Republicans apparently find the greatest amount of voter fraud. And as a result, you have to put in place these, voter ID laws. Doesn't seem to exist to the same extent in places where there are Democrats or in control, or where there is, bifurcated or trifurcated control of state government. So yeah, there's, I think, a direct correlation between gerrymandering and voter suppression. And that's just another way in which our democracy is demeaned, another way in which we increase political strife for no good reason. We increase polarization, and then government is ineffective, and then that raises the level of cynicism. People become cynical about the utility of government, and that's just not a good thing for us as a nation.
So we know that legislative bodies have not done the best job at drawing maps, and you said that in an ideal world, the best idea is to have nonpartisan commissions. And I'm wondering, can you point out some states that are doing it right? What are some models that we should be following, and how did we come to get to those systems, and what can other states do as states want to maintain their own process, and that's the reason that we have state boards of election, but what's a good basis for other states to follow?
I mean, I think Arizona and California are two states that we always hold out as doing it right. California, very blue state. Arizona, kind of a red state. Hey, but watch us Democrats. That's pretty red state, I think, at this point. Iowa, interestingly, has a system where they use career civil servants to draw the lines. They don't even have a commission. They just have these folks who just come to work every day, and every 10 years, some group of them gets together, draws a line, and throws them out there. So anything that takes it away from politicians whose, as I said, prime directive is to get reelected, put it in the hands of nonpartisan folks who are not concerned about favoring Democrats, favoring Republicans, drawing lines in such a way that you're trying to favor a particular political issue. That's the better way to do it. Again, let's not make this a battle of who can draw the lines the best, who can draw the lines the fairest are the ones who should be entrusted with this power. And that's why this group, I think, is so very, very important, because you all have the capacity to give people who are, I think, right-minded the tools that they need to present fair maps for consideration. And without your involvement, people will use the things that they did in 2011, but to be fair, have been used throughout the course of the history of this nation to draw lines in such a way that it's to the advantage of one party or the other, without any regard for what it means for the welfare of the people.
And how do we forge those connections as geographers? How do we get ourselves in the room and insert ourselves in the process? Because, on one-off basis, on certain states, they take geographers into account more seriously than others, and there's just not a standard for a geographer being present, and there hasn't been. And so how do you see this going forward? How do we get ourselves in the room?
I'll say there are two ways. One, as American citizens. I think you should understand that and not underestimate the power that we have as so-called ordinary citizens. You think about the march, the Women's March, the day after the inauguration, where the women of this country with those interesting hats, my wife and daughters were there, came out and really demonstrated, I thought, it was a real sign of political power. And then that political power was used later on when attempts were made to do away with the Affordable Care Act. If you remember, ordinary citizens went to town halls, went to the offices of their congressmen, went to the offices of their senators, and it was as a result of that citizen pressure that that which some people wanted to do, which is to really kind of mess with our healthcare system, they were stopped from doing this. So I think as individuals, you can certainly have an impact. But I also think that, I look at this room. This is filled with, 1,000, 1,500 people. I'm not sure how many. All good looking, by the way. I can say that in a Me Too movement, right? Because I was referring to the men as well.
Yes.
That as an organization, you have the capacity. You have the capacity to really influence. You use the power that you have here as a group to raise your hands organizationally and to say that we are here to help, but we're also here to watch, to make sure that that which is done using neutral principles. And so, I would urge you all to use the power of this organization in a positive way. And I really think, I was kind of kidding at it before, but I really do think that this is a critical election. This is a critical period for us. And the kind of America that we're going to have will be decided over the course of the next few years, the next few elections, not only on what happens, with regard to who's elected president in 2020, but with regard to a range of other elections as well. And I would urge you all to find ways to get involved in that regard.
So on that note, we're seeing that the 2020 field is filling up, and recently you announced that you're recommitting to this and not running and making this an issue of getting the attention it deserves as an issue of national importance.
I am, in fact, no.
But if you were,
No. I'm going to stay married.
On the edge of our seats. Well, so if that remains true, that you're not running and you're recommitted to this issue, you're giving it the attention that it deserves. All the while, we've been seeing other policy issues take center stage already, even with all the candidates who are declaring. This is not one of the issues that is getting attention.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, what can we as citizens do, and the NDRC working hand in hand with you guys, to make this issue one that elected politicians feel is important? Because how do you entice someone in office and potentially in a safe seat to want to take this issue on?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because it makes, the National Democratic Redistricting Committee doesn't mean that every Democrat is really happy about the existence of the NDRC. If you're sitting in a 80% Democratic district, you're like, whoa, what's this guy Holder doing? What's this all about, And so not everybody loves old Eric in the Democratic Party. But, it's, this is an issue I think that is beginning to break through, that people are starting to become aware of, because I think people have to understand, as I always tell folks, if you're concerned about the census, which leads to a fair redistricting process, gerrymandering and how the lines are drawn has an impact on issues that people really do care about and understand. Reproductive rights, voter suppression, expansion of Medicaid, health care. There's a whole range of issues that people, again, sane gun safety measures. These are all things that people care about but don't necessarily understand are directly connected to how the lines are drawn. And when we make those connections, then you see the light bulbs go on, everybody said that, and people, okay, and then they start to get involved. And I think one of the things we're going to be doing is probably talking to the presidential people who are seeking the office, seeking the nomination of the Democratic Party to take a pledge and to start talking about gerrymandering when they're out on the stump. To be fair, Beto O'Rourke, when I was watching his announcement, I guess in El Paso last week before last, and he was talking about something that was interesting, good stuff. He's a frenetic kind of guy, moves his arms a lot, and then he said gerrymandering was something that we ought to be focused on. It was like, whoop, my guy, and I suspect that. I'm not saying he's I thought that was good. I'm neutral. But I thought that was a good thing, and I suspect you're going to see more of them talking about the issue.
So the NDRC, I know, had identified a lot of battleground states leading up to the 2018 midterms, and this issue, obviously being at the state level, is so incremental. You do have to keep track of it on an incremental basis. And so after the 2018 midterms, looking forward to 2020, looking forward to further elections in the future, where are you all focused now? What are some of, as us as geographers, where can we focus and maybe lend our efforts and our expertise in different states, counties, districts?
Well, if you go to our website, which is demredistricting.com, democraticredistricting.com. Yeah, see, what a great leader I am. Democraticredistricting.com. You can see our targets for 2019 and 2020. 2019, we're looking at Louisiana, Kentucky, Virginia, and Wisconsin. We had had a race in Wisconsin where I campaigned for a woman who was running for Wisconsin Supreme Court. That election is now going to go to a recount. Looks like the Republican is now in the lead. But we're looking at Louisiana, as I said, Kentucky, and Virginia. And then in 2020, we have other states that we'll be focusing on. Not as many governor's races, because those were disproportionately decided in 2018. And so we will have a bunch of governors who were committed to fair redistricting who will be in office come 2021. So we're going to be focusing on state legislative races in 2020, especially like in Texas. Democrats picked up 12 seats in the Texas House of Representatives. We need 9 to flip that chamber. And if you do that, you then have a Democratic presence at the table. You have the state House of Representatives with a Republican Senate, a Republican governor, and that when you don't have trifecta control, that's the kind of thing that makes sure that Democratic interests are protected, that you end up with fairer maps. And the same is true in Democratic states, to the extent that you can have, again, not have trifecta control.
So I think that we have time for 1 or 2 audience questions, if that's all right
Sure.
with you, Mr. Holder.
Sure.
I don't think we have a mic available, so you might have to speak up.
So shout.
Is that okay then? We'll go right here in the front. Yes.
Hi, thanks. I really appreciated your words. They're very important. So there's the power of maps, and as geographers, we recognize that. There's also the power of the internet, and that's important. And so web-based maps are really critical. But I also want to recognize the power of mobility in the United States.
Right.
Is there anything preventing activist voters from moving to places that are currently gerrymandered and registering to vote there to shift it?
Boy, okay. That shows a level of commitment that even I'm not prepared to.
And it can be done. There are a lot of people who maybe don't own homes that could just move. It doesn't take very long to live in a place to register to vote there.
No, that's true. And as I said, we have 10 target states for 2020. If you want to move, that's something to be considered. But very, very seriously, one of the things that we're doing with our All on the Line campaign, there are people in California, for instance, where it's a state that has a good system. People in Arizona has a good system. The 5 other states are going to have a good system. But people want to be involved, and they want to make sure that the nation is better. And so we're coming up with ways in which, for instance, people in California can talk to voters in Wisconsin to get them out to vote, make them aware of the issues through the magic of the telephone, through the internet, a whole range of ways in which we engage people in the nation to focus on not only what's happening in their communities, but what's happening in other areas as well. I have not thought, I'll be honest with you, about the possibility of asking people to move. But if you want to go to, let's see, North Carolina, Texas, Georgia, Florida, forgetting one, Ohio, right? Those are our big 5 for 20. Those are the big 5 for 2020. There's some wonderful places. Miami's great, Charlotte is wonderful. Think of, the weather's nice. It's a temperate climate.
In order to register, is there for what time?
Yeah, registration depends state by state, but to register to vote in a particular state does not require a huge amount of time to be actually in residence.
Okay, one more question.
Time for
Hi.
one more question.
Oh.
Thank you.
I'm totally just taking over because I have the mic. Hi, I'm Jen Alford-Teester. I actually ran for New Hampshire State Senate and lost because I'm in a very gerrymandered district.
Yep.
I've been hoping and waiting for you to encourage geographers here to run for office, right? Because largely what I ran into is trying to overcome a very rural district that did not really have a city center, so having to go out to 24 towns over the campaign cycle, which was one of the most meaningful things. I was just telling a friend, it was just like having a qualitative research project where you're going into people's homes and asking them questions. But despite the energy and the fundraising, we couldn't overcome the gerrymandering. So please do consider running for office.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, let me end here then. I mean, and I salute you for running. That in some ways is the ultimate sign the ultimate indication of participation. And I think that's what we all have to do. We have to figure out ways in which we can become civically engaged. We have, I think, the capacity to change this nation for the better. But beyond that, I think that we as ordinary citizens, and no, there are really no ordinary citizens, we're all extraordinary citizens. We not only have the capacity, we have the responsibility to be engaged in the life of this nation, the political life of this nation. And the reality is, if you don't do it, if you don't do the things like you've explained, run for office, people who are less intelligent, who are less qualified, who are less committed to idealistic things and less committed to the ideals that are embodied in our founding documents, they'll take, your places. And they will be the ones deciding what kind of America we're going to have in the 21st century. Dr. King said that the arc of the moral universe is long and it bends towards justice. But guess what? That arc only bends towards justice when committed citizens put their hands on it and pull it towards justice. And so I would urge all of you to think of ways in which, whether it's through what we've talked about here, fighting gerrymandering, having a fair census, or in some other way, getting involved in the life of the nation, the civic life of the nation, so that we make it better. We should not be pessimistic about this nation. I get a little distressed when I hear things about let's make America great again. It seems to me that looks back towards an America that in some ways never really existed and really doesn't go to that which makes us exceptional as a nation. We look at the future, which is always uncertain, and we embrace it, and we change it, and we bend it towards American ideals. That's what's always made this nation great. That's what will keep this nation great. You all have that responsibility, as I said, to make sure that that happens. And you all, I think, have a unique capability that you should not underestimate. So I hope that through this interaction and through things that you'll read and things that we'll be doing, that I've found a bunch of new partners in this effort to make a better America. Thank you all.